When two outcast teenage boys with odd interests became friends, they quickly grew inseparable. When one had a bad idea, the other would take part in it. This could be anything from skipping class to joining extremist groups to becoming a duo of serial killers. It's not often that we cover killer duos on this channel, and that's because they don't really happen that often. There's always that greater chance of one of the prospective killers ratting out the other one or simply talking them out of their plans. It's pretty rare that they come up with an absolutely insane plan and carry it out until the very end, and this is one of those cases. Artyom Onufriev was born on October 4th, 1992. He was born in a city in central Siberia in Russia called Irkutsk. He was raised by his single mother, Nina Ivanova Onufriev. His father wasn't in the picture at all. Nina worked as an accountant at an insurance company and did her best to raise him, but it has been shown that she was anything but a good influence on her son. Nina has made it known that she's quite the misanthrope, meaning that she has a hatred of people. She did her best to pass this hatred on to her son, with it being said that she specifically instructed him to hate people. While Artyom was spoken of positively by his friends in his early years at school, his mother made life difficult for his teachers. Whenever he got bad grades, she would write complaints about his teachers, saying that they had tortured her son psychologically by putting too much pressure on him. If his grades weren't spelled out clearly for her, she would complain that the teachers were hiding information from her. Still, despite that, it seems that Artyom did have a fairly normal early life in school. Nikita Litkin was born on March 24th, 1993. Much like Artyom, he was from the city of Irkutsk, and his father wasn't present in his life, being raised by his mother Marina instead. His father was an Ossetian, which is an Iranian ethnic group who left the family when he was a young child. Throughout his childhood, Marina tried to raise him as a Christian, getting both herself and Nikita baptized. This was pretty short-lived, however, as she lost interest in church and stopped going after about 2 years, instead focusing on work much more. After his mother came to reject the church, so did Nikita. While Marina had simply lost focus on church, Nikita took her lack of interest to mean that she disliked church, so he came to adopt this perspective himself. While Nikita seemed pretty quiet and calm to everyone around him, his mom said that he was actually a very closed-off person who often failed to communicate. If anyone came over to their house, he refused to interact with them and instead stayed in his room. He started to get into trouble when he began to dabble in graffiti, being caught spray painting the entrance to their house. By the time Nikita was in 5th grade, he was said to have been a fairly good student. He had good behavior, good class participation, and entered into some contests in school related to the arts. However, it was said that due to this good performance, the other kids at school saw him as strange and didn't want to associate with him. But that comment is coming from Nikita's mother, and it's fair to say she's most likely biased. Eventually, Nikita did get a friend, a boy named Artur Lashenko. His mother later said of Artur, he treated him like an object, but he helped him a lot, helped him to adapt. Now, both Nikita and Artyom were attending the same school, but they didn't know each other. This all changed when Artur invited the both of them to his birthday party. Both of the boys chose to attend the birthday party because they each lacked any meaningful friendships and wanted to branch out. They came to bond very quickly over the negativity in their life. They each understood what it was like to be abandoned by a parent, to be rejected by their classmates, and to have a lot of bottled-up hatred that neither of them could quite yet understand. It wasn't all bad, though. The two of them also liked punk and metal music and began to talk about forming their own band. It wasn't long at all before the two of them became almost inseparable. Nikita had grown very depressed in his life and saw Artyom as the only person he could vent to about his problems. Artyom was happy to help, offering him all the support he needed. By this stage, Nikita's mother had actually grown more concerned about his friendship with Artur, feeling that Artur was far too dominant in their friendship. She said, "Nikita could not refuse, did not know how to say no. He had no option. I taught him to be able to say this very no, and when he learned that, he stopped being friends with Artur." Given that Artyom wasn't a very likable kid, all hanging out with him did was make Nikita even more unpopular at school. His previous casual friends began to slowly dip out of his life. Nikita himself began to take on Artyom's more unlikable traits as well. However, this didn't really bother him at all. He referred to all of his old friends as fake children's friendships. Artur later said that Nikita's behavior had quickly changed. He stopped greeting any of the other kids he knew at school. Eventually, he closed himself off entirely. Artur gave a different reasoning as to why he had changed, however, saying that Nikita was actually jealous of his classmates from wealthier, more stable families. This was a double-edged sword, as the more Nikita came to isolate himself, the more strange he looked and the more he came to be bullied by the other kids at school. Artyom said that Nikita could never stand up for himself, instead always giving up very quickly. Instead of fighting back, Nikita would shout "die" at his bullies, only making him look more odd. This earned him the nickname Jimbo among his peers, which is the name of a teenage character in The Simpsons named Jimbo Jones, one known for his cruelty. Nikita was said to have been slow when it came to psychological development ever since he was a child. After seeing some psychologist, his mother had been advised to give him more freedom and ease up on her strict restrictions. As time passed, Nikita began to grow ashamed of his mom and started to avoid her as much as he could. Nikita began to skip a lot of school starting in 8th grade, as did Artyom. However, for reasons unknown, Artyom wasn't punished too heavily for it. Nikita, however, was full-on expelled after skipping only 9 classes, which seems to be a very extreme consequence. As a result, Nikita's future was basically left in ruin, with him having very few prospects moving forward. At this point in his life, he didn't really have much beyond his friendship with Artyom. After that, Nikita and Artyom began to focus almost entirely on their friendship with each other. They decided to act on their plans to form a band, making one that they called Evil Dwarves. While they didn't stick with this one for too long, they did release a full album in 2008 called Black Streaks of Blood when they were around 16. Not too long after, they abandoned Evil Dwarves and came up with a new idea. They made a noise band, one that they called Dismembered Pugacheva, with Pugacheva being a Russian singer. They really focused on shock value and trying to be as offensive as possible with this one, even more than before. Most of the lyrics were about violence with a comical level of over-the-top cursing all throughout. The sound of the music has been described as a combination of all the different genres typically considered to be brutal. Hardcore punk, gore noise, gore grind, porno grind, noise grind, lo-fi noise, and harsh noise. They expressed their hatred towards basically anything you could imagine, but especially focused on the less fortunate members of the population and society in general, as well as a hatred for politicians and mainstream entertainment. Both of them also shared a strong hatred for Christianity, often mocking Jesus in their music. The two actually kept their musical ventures a secret from most of the people who knew them. To everyone around him, Nikita never even showed a slight interest in any sort of heavier music. As their hatred grew, the two Edgy boys graduated from scribbling anarchy symbols and anti-Christian symbols on anything they could find to brandishing swastikas. Given the polar opposite beliefs of anarchy and Nazism, it's pretty clear that they were mainly just trying to be provocative at the time. They saw the swastika as a symbol for hatred of all types in general at first, not seeming to link it to actual Nazis specifically. In 2009, Nikita began to try and get into schooling once again. He first began taking classes related to energy. He didn't take too long before he was once again expelled, this time for completely bombing and failing every test there was, failing the first semester entirely. He tried again, this time going to classes related to construction. This time he chose to leave himself. This time around, the story was a bit more complicated. Much like in his earlier days, Nikita had come to be bullied at this school. This time he decided to get back at one of them, breaking into his house and stealing a bunch of his money and belongings. Nikita's own mom actually filed a police report against him when she heard of what he did, but she ultimately chose to withdraw it when she learned that he might face jail time. After that, Nikita stopped going to those classes entirely and dropped out. Artyom, still in school, hadn't improved his reputation at all. In fact, his physics teacher refused to teach any class that he was a part of, leading to the school having to look for a new teacher entirely. Still, Artyom did pretty well in his schoolwork, all things considered. He also gradually became pretty active in different activities and competitions in the school. He started playing the guitar and the bass, as well as becoming a somewhat talented singer. He even started playing in a local band for a while without Nikita before it fizzled out. Behind the scenes, though, Artyom began to grow more invested in Nazi ideals over time. Once in 2009, he decided to very vulgarly insult a local Armenian family on social media. The family ended up challenging him to a fight, and for some reason, Artyom actually showed up despite being heavily outnumbered. They took him to a secluded area and beat him to a pulp. He ended up with significant injuries to his head and nose. It has been said that afterward, he was taken to a forest where he was forced to strip naked and do what has only been described as follow orders. Many have come to assume that this means exactly what it sounds like. Artyom's family ended up filing a criminal case, but in the end, none of the Armenians were ever charged. This was after a sum of 50,000 rubles, roughly $1,700 at the time, was given to Artyom's family. Afterward, according to his mother, Artyom became, in her words, very unbalanced. While Nikita's father was absent, he ended up marrying another woman and having a son with her. When this second wife died, their son ended himself shortly after, leaving him with nothing. While he came back to Nikita's area, he was so depressed that he couldn't bring himself to contact Nikita. However, after some time passed, he did reach out to him and began meeting with the family sporadically. Still, it didn't really last. The two had a lot of difficulty communicating altogether, and Nikita never saw his father again after the age of 16. It was only toward the end of school that Artyom began to open up and stop being an outcast. However, at the same time, his grades started to suffer. When it came nearly time to graduate, Artyom's classmates filmed a video in which they were asked what happiness means to them. Artyom was the only one who responded without a specific answer, instead saying, "To be honest, I don't know what happiness is, but I would really like to quickly find out what it is." Eventually it came time to graduate and Artyom moved on to the Irkutsk State Medical University. He also took up a part-time job as a worker in an art museum. While it may have appeared that things were looking up for him, that wasn't really the case behind the scenes. Artyom, leaning even more heavily into Nazism now, decided to join a local skinhead group. Eventually he was drawn to the group after communicating with their leader and being urged to read a book that translates to Born to Hate in English. Artyom, as well as Nikita, became very interested as they felt the protagonist of the story had views very similar to their own. They grew interested in the violence of the book, wanting to commit much of the same violence themselves. However, it was said that Artyom never participated in their outreach and wasn't very active. Still, he tried to get Nikita to join the group, but he was rejected due to the fact that he had an Ossetian middle name from his father. Artyom actually came to grow pretty disillusioned with the skinheads as well, and it was because he felt their ideology was actually too passive and too soft for his liking. Artyom also differed when it came to their views. The skinheads obviously focused their hatred towards some groups and not others, while Artyom hated everyone in general, including white people, and by extension, them. Eventually, he had very little to do with the group any longer. Although Artyom had grown interested in music, painting, and kickboxing as well, that came to change as his hatred continued to grow. In time, he gradually gave all of it up as he began to get more addicted to social media. He went by the username Corpse online. His new interest in social media spread to Nikita as well, who even started a YouTube channel under the name Fakinifor, which the two of them would use to post videos. The first video they uploaded was called Bloody Vomit. It was a pretty crudely slapped together video. It began with alternating text that read in English, vacant, and absolutely, before text that, according to my translator, says anal ensemble. This was followed by the name of their band, Dismembered Pugacheva, and presents hacks. The video then cuts to a bathroom covered in graffiti and swastikas while a low-quality speech plays as audio. A man dressed in punk attire then vomits blood into the toilet before turning into a skeleton. The text on screen then says, "This clip was based on real photos. Didn't you like it? So you're a jerk and suck dog dick." The next video, uploaded December 1st, 2009, was called Sicha SS. This was a video of Nikita and Artyom recording the news on the TV. The actual news itself was muted, with the two boys dubbing over it themselves as they laughed. On January 29th, 2010, they uploaded a video called Dismembered Pugacheva Rodaki Scum. It featured a song made by the both of them and posed over gameplay footage of the video game Manhunt. At some point, Nikita also uploaded a video of himself in a hoodie, mask, and sunglasses. It was very brief, mostly only showing him dancing around. It was later deleted. Another deleted video was another Dismembered Pugacheva music video, one that shows Jesus being crucified upside down among other anti-Christian imagery. Artyom's mother began to grow very concerned about his friendship with Nikita. She started to feel that she needed to forbid them from contacting one another, saying that Nikita was too bad of an influence. From her perspective, it's pretty easy to see why. Nikita had been the one to get expelled from school twice and had always shown a cruel, antisocial side. It seemed that she was unaware that her own son was equally as bad. Artyom and Nikita became very interested in other killers. One day they watched a documentary on TV about a man called the Bitsa Park Maniac, Alexander Pichushkin. On social media, they created a group idolizing him called Pichushkin, Our President. They also became very interested in another Russian killer, the Rostov Ripper, a man by the name of Andrei Romanovich. Given that he had been executed, they posted online, "Andrei Romanovich, we grieve." As many killers on the younger side do, Artyom and Nikita became fairly interested in Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the two teenage boys behind the Columbine massacre. They also became very interested in Viktor Sayenko and Igor Sapronyuk, better known as the Dnipropetrovsk Maniacs. They were two Ukrainian serial killers who created what would become an infamous shock video on the internet, 3 Guys, 1 Hammer, a video showing them brutally murdering a grandfather with a hammer concealed in a plastic bag. They also became very interested in a gang from their city, the Blood Magic Gang. They showed a lot of sympathy for the gang's leader and his various criminal activities. They even dedicated a Dismembered Pugacheva song to him, calling it Blood Magic. They even outright stated that they would love to continue his work. They wrote, "The Dismembered Pugacheva group will continue the work for the Blood Magic, not only in the musical sense but also in the real sense. There is no place for posers in our group. Only those who decide the fate of cattle or are only going to start serious actions are allowed. If you are determined, you are here. It was around this time that Artyom's neighbors began to grow concerned as well. They could hear him shouting from his apartment, screaming, "I hate everyone, and I will kill you all," at the top of his lungs. They could hear what sounded like him slamming his fists on the wall or body slamming his doors. Some came to wonder if he was beating his mother, as they could hear screams of "get off of me" from time to time as well. This was likely accurate as, according to Artyom himself, his relationship with his mother had gotten so bad that he didn't know if he could stop himself from killing her. Nikita, similarly, had grown to hate his own mother as well. As his depression and insomnia grew in intensity, so did his self-imposed isolation from his family. With their hatred, their admiration of other killers, and their desire to harm society, the two would finally come to pass the point of no return. Artyom and Nikita had decided that they were ready to set out on their mission to start killing people. It seems that they had very little motivation for desiring to do so aside from their hatred of other people. The two of them started going on walks nearly every evening, always in the same place, starting in November of 2010. They would start out at the State University bus stop and walk up to the Akademgarodok, an academic campus that we will simply call Academy from here on out. From roughly 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., while their moms were at work, they would walk past dozens of potential victims, carefully trying to scope out who might be the most vulnerable. For the first week of this new routine, they didn't actually go about attacking anyone. Still, they carried their tools of trade, mainly hammers, bats, and knives. This inaction all changed on November 14th, 2010. This was when Artyom and Nikita came across their first victim, an 18-year-old woman named Anastasia Markovskaya. She was walking towards the Novo-Ikrutsky when the two boys sneaked up on her from behind and bashed her in the back of the head. Anastasia fell to the ground, still alive. Artyom and Nikita felt that they had killed her and quickly got spooked, leading to the two of them running off into the night. Given that she wasn't robbed, the Irkutsk Police Department refused to even open up a criminal case. As a result, Anastasia took to the internet to describe what had happened to her, posting on a forum for the Academy. Little did she know, Artyom and Nikita came to hear about these posts. The two of them began messaging her, keeping their identities a secret. They asked her what she felt when she was hit and how it made her feel afterwards. Little did she know, they were disappointed that they hadn't killed her. 10 days after the first attack on the 24th, Artyom and Nikita set out once again to attack another. This time they came across a 46-year-old woman who was walking home. Rather than kill her, they simply attacked her and stole her bag. This time, as the victim was robbed, a criminal case was actually opened. However, assault was not listed as an element of the case. Once again, the boys' assaults would go completely unknown thanks to the police's refusal to investigate the area. It's due to this refusal to increase patrols in the area or even investigate the assaults that, next time, things would be much, much worse. On December 1st, Artyom and Nikita once again set out on one of their night crawls. They found another woman walking alone. As they approached her to murder her, they noticed a nearby witness. Scared that they might be caught, they instead stole the woman's bag and ran away. Inside the bag was a mere 500 rubles, but they were happy to get it. They used this money to go and buy some mallets. Their night didn't end there. Once they were fairly certain that the police weren't coming, they continued on their walk. After a while, they came across a 12-year-old boy named Daniil Semyonov. Coincidentally, he attended the same school that they used to. Daniil had been riding around on his scooter in the snow, enjoying himself as Artyom and Nikita watched him. Nikita suggested that they kill the boy, given that he wouldn't be able to put up much of a fight, to which Artyom happily agreed. The two of them ran towards Daniil. Nikita pulled out a mallet and slammed it against the back of his head. When the boy fell to the ground, Artyom pulled out a baseball bat and continued to beat him. Daniil did have defensive wounds on his hand, meaning that he likely tried to fight back as much as he could. Nikita then pulled out a penknife and drove it into his temple all the way up to the handle. They then fled the scene. Daniil's mother was the one to come outside and find him. He was severely injured, but he was still alive. She called an ambulance for help, but the emergency services ended up getting caught in a traffic jam along the way. By the time they arrived, he was already dead. At first, it wasn't even believed that Daniil's death was a murder. It was assumed that he had hit a tree going at a very high speed on his scooter. However, one investigator noticed that his scooter was undamaged. The hill in that area was far too slight to build up an uncontrollable amount of speed, and there was nothing in the snow that he could have smashed his head on in such a way that could explain his injury. Still, even with his concerns, no criminal case was opened in Daniil's death. Artyom and Nikita had claimed their first victim, all without the police even looking for them. Now that they had gotten a taste for murder, they weren't going to stop. A little over 2 weeks later, on December 16th, the two boys once again left for the night to go prowl for victims. They arrived at a location that was only a mere 20 meters from where they had killed Daniil. This was where they noticed a woman, 69-year-old Olga Mikhailovna Pirog. She was actually a leading researcher at the Research Institute for Solar and Terrestrial Physics. Artyom and Nikita began recording some audio, on which they first discussed how they would kill her. The two then quickly descended on her, stabbing her repeatedly over and over again as the audio recording continued. Olga died then and there, becoming their second victim. This time, however, the police would finally come to realize that they had a problem on their hands. By this point, the two killers had a bit of a system going. Artyom would usually deal the first blow, while Nikita was far more interested in mutilating their bodies as much as possible. Neither one of them really played less of a part than the other, usually ending up dealing anywhere from 15 to 20 to more blows themselves. They would attack their victims from behind, meaning that, if they were to survive, most of them would have a very hard time describing anything about them at all. They usually didn't even talk while their victims were alive, leaving them with even less to work with. It was only a matter of days before they continued their killing spree. On December 29th, they once again targeted a female victim at around 6 a.m. This was Inessa Valentinovna Svetlova. By sheer luck, she was able to escape the two of them without much harm. All she lost was her handbag, which the two boys ended up tossing shortly after. By this point, Artyom and Nikita had grown more bold. They weren't all too concerned with being caught. They took a break for about an hour before looking for another victim. This time, they came across a 22-year-old pregnant woman named Yekaterina Kaprova and her 6-year-old niece, Olya Averina. Yekaterina noticed Artyom and Nikita, but didn't think much of them as she answered a phone call. Soon after, though, the two boys ambushed her. They beat her niece on her sides, giving her a severe hematoma near her liver. Despite Yekaterina shouting out that she was pregnant, the two beat her as well. They smashed in her head and broke many of her fingers, with the boys snapping each one of them themselves. Then a car approached the four of them. Fearing the witness, Artyom and Nikita sprinted off into the distance. Yekaterina and Olya were rushed to the hospital, where they ended up being placed near Inessa, the first victim that morning, completely unaware that their two cases were related. Luckily, all of them survived, including Yekaterina's unborn baby. Things wouldn't turn out so lucky a few days later on New Year's Day 2011. Once again choosing to venture out early in the morning, Artyom and Nikita decided to start hunting for their next victim at 5 a.m. They came across a homeless man as he was alone near some trash cans off to the side of the street. They quickly pounced on him, smashing his head in with their mallets and dealing about 40 blows to the rest of his body. The victim, who was never able to be identified, was found and rushed to the hospital, but it was far too late for him. He became another victim. On January 15th, the police came to arrest a 19-year-old homeless man, Vladimir Bazilevsky, who appeared to have blood on his clothes, positive that he must be the man who murdered the previous victim. While he heavily denied the attack, as he didn't commit it, the police forced a confession out of him by beating him. He was then forced to write out his confession, where he said that the victim's name was Andrei. This was actually just his friend's name, as he obviously didn't know the victim. He was actually convicted of the murder and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Artyom and Nikita would then take a break for about a month, only coming back to their killing spree on the 30th of January. This was when they found a male student, Oleg Semyonov, who was leaving a nightclub called the Stratosphere. Artyom and Nikita attacked him, but he managed to escape. This wasn't without injury, however. He was left with bruising all over his head, a concussion, and traumatic brain injuries. On February 3rd, much of the same would happen again when the two young killers attacked an old woman on the streets. She, too, survived, being taken to the hospital with a severe open wound on her head. Only a few nights later, they attacked another woman who also managed to survive. This was because a car arrived that once again scared the two boys off. However, the next victim wouldn't be so lucky as the last few. This would be the night of February 21st. Artyom and Nikita came across a man named Alexander Maximov as he was returning home from his sister's house, fairly inebriated. He asked the two boys, "Guys, do you know where I can find a place to stay overnight? I'm stuck in your neighborhood and don't have the money to leave." Artyom and Nikita told him, "Yes, come with us." The two killers then jumped him and broke his jaw very severely. Nikita, just for the fun of it, shot him in the head with an airsoft pistol. Artyom then tried to remove his eyeballs, but he couldn't figure out how to do it. They left, and eventually the victim was found. His head damage was so extreme that he was forced to be buried in a closed casket. His skull was actually admitted into police evidence. The night of the 27th was very different from their usual routine. This time, Nikita decided to look for a victim himself. He came across a woman named Nina Kuzmina as she sat on a bench. He ran up to her and hit her twice on the head. When she cried out in pain, a man in a nearby home looked out of his window. Noticing that he had been spotted, Nikita fled before he could continue his attack, stealing her phone as he ran off. On March 10th, the two boys then decided to look for another victim, this time spotting a homeless man near the State University bus stop, very close to Artyom's home. Artyom approached the man and offered to buy him a drink and a snack if he followed him. The man, Roman Faisalin, refused. Artyom then pulled out a BB gun and shot him twice in the face. The two then dragged him into the bushes where they stabbed him repeatedly in the head, chest, and crotch. Nikita tried to cut off his hand but was unsuccessful in doing so, only removing his finger in the end. Artyom then returned to his apartment where he took a picture of the bloody scene from his window. After the victim's body was found, there was a rally held at the academy. They discussed what kind of measures could be put into place to stop these violent attacks and find the killers. All that was known about their suspects was that they were likely from 16 to 18 years old. Little did anyone know, Artyom and Nikita were right there at the rally. They even offered up some ideas as to what should be done, recording the whole thing on their phones. From then on, more patrols were carried out in the area. As a result, crime in the area did drop fairly substantially. However, it didn't do anything to deter the main killers they were looking for. Misinformation about the two killers began to spread like wildfire as well, leading to most of the people in the nearby area coming to the conclusion that the killers were actually one single 30-year-old man. Given that most people assumed this would be a stranger who wasn't even from the area, none of them were even looking for someone like Artyom or Nikita, who lived very nearby. It was thanks to this random, incorrect information that they were able to continue their attacks even longer. While the specific dates of the next two attacks aren't quite known, we do know that Artyom and Nikita once again attacked a homeless person, this time a woman. A police officer just happened to see them in the act from his apartment window. This caused the two of them to flee immediately. Another night, they approached a woman who was standing around under an archway near their usual path. This time, Artyom pulled out a screwdriver to attack her. Given that the place was fairly crowded, they decided against killing her and simply stole her bag before running away. Things would once again ramp up in intensity in the month of April. On the 3rd, they came across another homeless woman, 63-year-old Alevtina Kuidina. The two boys stabbed her to death in their usual fashion. However, afterwards, they decided to back away from the scene and begin filming a video. Much like in some of the shock videos they had been impressed by, they decided to once again approach her body and mutilate it with a knife on camera. Nikita cut off part of her ear before cutting at her wrists and eyes. He then stabbed her repeatedly in the face before the two cut the video and fled. On their way out, the two took the earlobe that they had removed from the woman and threw it toward the entrance of their old school. Artyom, excited at what they had filmed, chose to send it to one of his online friends from St. Petersburg named Ilya Ustinov. Ilya then proceeded to leak the video, which soon came to spread all over the internet. This video soon made it to the police themselves, who tried to figure out more details as to exactly when and where it was filmed. Artyom and Nikita were still very active online themselves. There, they described their crimes in fairly accurate detail. Artyom even wrote, "We are gods, deciding who will live and who will die." The two even tried to recruit more online users to their little cause, trying to make even more young men into killers. While talking to a boy named Yura Anufriev, the two decided to try to convince him to kill a janitor to train his mind into becoming that of a killer. It was later found that the people that Artyom and Nikita spoke to online felt that they were full of crap. None of them actually believed that they were doing what they claimed they had been doing. They thought that, at the least, they were using someone else's crimes to gain internet clout. At most, they might have been making it up entirely. Artyom and Nikita began to be referred to as the Academy Maniacs by journalists. One journalist in particular gave a description of who they might be. She wrote, "Akademovsky residents think they are afraid of a killer maniac or teenagers hooked up on a bloody craft. There are no other versions about the one who kills, and a certain Spider-Man sitting at a computer at home is genuinely amused, knowing how much people are afraid of him. In fact, hundreds of people, precisely according to his reports of victims, gather in the squares, organize people's guards, and are afraid to take to the streets. Oh, this person feels like a winner. We are in the age of the internet, gentlemen." By now, everyone had heard of the Academy Maniacs, and people were on high alert. It was during the scare that Nikita's mother found a knife in a package in their hallway, as well as a knife in Nikita's jacket. When she asked her son what he needed them for, he told her it was for self-defense. Much to their confusion, Nikita also came to tell his grandmother, quote, "I will soon be lost." This same grandma worked at the Institute of Organic Chemistry. The police came by her place of work, distributing sketches of what the Academy Maniacs were said to look like. Nikita's grandma was shocked, noticing that one of them looked a lot like her grandson. She came home and shared them with Nikita's uncle Vladislav. He agreed that something was likely terribly wrong. Uncle Vladislav went to Nikita's house to see him. He wasn't home at the time, but he had left his camera out in the open. Vladislav picked it up to see what it contained. There he came upon the sight of Artyom and Nikita mutilating the homeless woman on video. Vladislav ran out of the house and took the camera to the police. And with that, the Academy Maniacs were as good as finished. Within only an hour and a half, the police were able to find both of their suspects and detain them. While being arrested, Nikita was actually very calm, as his family had already persuaded him to give it up and surrender. Artyom, although he didn't react in a violent way, did react in a way that nobody expected. He decided to imitate one of his favorite killers, the Bitsa Park Maniac, with a quote. As one hero said, "Give me a glass of whiskey and a cigar, and you will learn so much new about this life that your hair will begin to move on your head." As the investigators interrogated Artyom and Nikita, they came to find out the actual number of crimes that they had committed, 6 murders and 10 more violent attacks. The two boys even confessed that they had planned to go out and kill again the very night that they were arrested. The investigators came to find a 60mm mallet, 4 teeth and a black hat, likely trophies, an airsoft gun that Artyom had hidden, multiple knives, videos, and memory cards. They found journal-type notebooks as well, all full of vulgarity. Artyom's mother actually found one of the notebooks while the police were investigating and rushed to destroy it herself, seeing that it contained clear proof that Artyom was one of the killers. On April 7th, the courts decided to throw Artyom and Nikita into detention for 2 months for the time being, planning to extend that detention each time they approached release for as long as they needed to. They would come to do this many times over the preceding months. In police custody, Artyom came to make an apology video. On June 9th, this video was actually released to the public. Many people found that his message was incredibly shallow and performative. It was pretty clear that he was trying to sway public opinion in his favor, at least a little, in hopes of a lighter sentence. It was said that his speech was very cliché for someone in his position, seeming pre-prepared. He even tried to pass the blame on the Nazi groups he had already left before he started killing. He said, "I want to apologize to everyone. My advice to parents, ban your children from visiting nationalist sites on social media. I began my terrifying journey by associating with nationalists. These are people who, while supposedly defending the interests of their nation, commit crimes of all kinds. They promote their behavior online, conduct hand-to-hand knife fighting training, hold marches, target practice, and after sufficient preparation, commit beatings, murders, and riots in the streets. Young people typically don't tell their families about their visits to such groups. I did the same. And subsequently, my association with nationalists led me to commit serious crimes for which I am ready to repent. After going to prison, I realized the full danger posed by various extremist movements, and I blame myself for not immediately realizing that I needed to seek advice from my parents so that more experienced adults could explain to me what nationalism is. I caused enormous emotional pain to my relatives and the relatives of those who suffered from my actions, for which I want to ask everyone's forgiveness. My advice to parents is to prohibit their children from visiting nationalist websites, as well as similar groups on popular social media. Things were made worse when Nikita's grandmother tried to defend her grandson as well. In a letter to the media, she blamed the internet and the media for causing her grandson to do all of this. Still, for the time being, the Academy Maniacs would remain in detention, and they would rot there for about a year. When it came to Vladimir Basilevsky, the 19-year-old homeless man who had been convicted on one of the Maniac's murders, an investigator eventually found his story to be a little strange. He found that the blood on his clothes didn't even match the victim's, which apparently nobody had even checked. Not only that, but the fake name he gave for the victim led back to his friend, who was very much alive. The investigator told the prosecutor that they needed to review the case, but he was refused. Word about this eventually got to a human rights organization, Public Verdict, who decided to take on the case. In May of 2012, after 1.5 years in prison, Vladimir was finally released and all of his charges were dropped. Nothing ever happened to the officer who beat him and forced him into confessing. One other officer, however, was accused of falsifying evidence and was fired from his job. He was later sentenced to 3 years in prison with 2 years of probation afterwards. However, his sentence was cancelled after he filed an appeal. Instead, the state was ordered to give out 300,000 rubles to Vladimir. In August of 2012, Artyom and Nikita's cases were transferred to the regional court. The trial slowly proceeded for months. Over time, 16 victims and 50 witnesses were questioned in great detail. Over 49 thick volumes of data were collected. In total, Artyom and Nikita had been hit with 6 charges of murder, 9 charges of attempted murder, 3 of robbery, 3 for desecration of a corpse, and 1 for extremism. Given that Artyom was slightly older than the 17-year-old at the time Nikita, he was hit with 14 more charges of engaging a minor in criminal activity. Artyom refused to admit any guilt in his involvement in nearly all of the cases, except the 2 murders that were caught on audio and video. Nikita, on the other hand, admitted to all of it aside from the charge of extremism. It was decided that Artyom and Nikita would take place in an on-site demonstration of their testimonies, mainly speaking in detail of how they committed their crimes. All throughout, they were guarded by at least 20 officers in fear that the locals would kill them as revenge. The father of Daniil, the young boy that they had killed, wanted to be present at the demonstration but wasn't allowed to participate in fear that he would either kill the 2 boys or incite others to do so. Artyom only showed up to speak about what he had done while Nikita did most of the walking. After it was over, the 2 were placed into solitary confinement as plans were discovered even within the prison of a revenge-killing plot against them. Some witnesses came to refuse to testify. Many didn't want to remind themselves of their traumatic attacks. The trial had to take multiple breaks as people kept fainting at all the details. Artyom was said to, at first, act very cynical and scrutinize the statements of the witnesses. However, after enough time had passed, he started to cry as he realized he wasn't getting out of this. When it came time to give his testimony, he placed all of the blame on Nikita, saying that he was present for the murders but didn't actually participate. Nikita, in contrast, seemed pretty blank and aloof throughout the trial. One time he claimed to have a headache and said he was unable to continue, leading to another delay. When things resumed, he usually gave short, matter-of-fact statements with many long pauses in between. Artyom wasn't taking things the same way. He only grew more emotional and enraged as things went on. One day in court, he pulled out a razor and began injuring himself with it, mainly on the side of his neck. He refused to explain why he did so, but the reason is fairly evident regardless. His lawyer said that it was simply the result of strong emotions, mainly because his mom appeared in court that day. Artyom then, about a month later, decided to file a complaint against the police and investigators for causing him psychological harm and treating him violently as they arrested him. He said that his time in detention wasn't any better either. He now said that he only confessed to any of the murders at all because of pressure from the police. He then complained that he hadn't received materials and documents relative to his case either. It was eventually determined that there were no irregularities with his arrest or life in detention aside from an abrasion on his head of unknown origin. Things only got worse for the Maniacs when Yekaterina Koprova, the pregnant woman they had attacked, sued them each for 1 million rubles. Then another victim started a lawsuit as well. Soon after, so did the son of their final victim. It was ultimately decided that the 2 boys would have to pay about 2.75 million rubles, roughly $88,000 at the time. This would come out of the money they earned in prison, meaning they would likely never pay off even a slight portion of it. Much like Artyom's previous apology, Nikita would come to write a letter from detention that soon went public. However, Nikita's letter was much more honest about his past and feelings. He also admitted guilt and didn't try to blame anyone else for what he did. It read, "I had been in jail for 6 months now. I survived here a lot and I was thinking a lot. I was thinking about my life, childhood, mother, and my childhood friends. I realized that back then, when I was a kid, I was really happy. When I was in 6th grade, I met Artyom. This was the beginning of the end. All my old friends moved somewhere else. I didn't make any new ones, and my classmates didn't like me. I was bullied. I wanted nothing. I didn't want to study or go to training. I didn't want to live, to be honest. I couldn't tell my mother about it because I thought that it was something shameful, and I was afraid that she will go to the school and it will make things only worse. I was angry at everyone. I've lost faith in myself, people, and justice. I shared my feelings only with Artyom. He supported me in everything and had similar troubles at school and at home. When I think about it now, I realize how stupid I was. I should have lived another way. I needed not to pay attention to bullies, and I should have proven myself doing something good. I should have returned to the school and continued to pursue sports. Now I understand I proved nothing by killing innocent people. I'm guilty and I'm ready to accept the punishment. Sometimes I don't believe that I was capable of doing something like that. If I could go back in time, I would never commit any of these crimes." This was the only major statement ever released from Nikita. It's unknown if he has even written any other letters. Artyom, on the other hand, had been very vocal ever since being put into detention. He would talk to reporters, send letters, and even correspond with his fans and admirers, all while trying to maintain that he was innocent. Given that Artyom and Nikita began to change their stories together, the court was put into a bit of a bind. As Artyom continued to deny being part of the murders, Nikita gradually came to change his story to support that notion, saying that Artyom hadn't been involved at all in the 4 that weren't caught on video or audio. From then on, the 2 were separated in the courtroom and no longer allowed to contact each other in any way. In February of 2013, the boys' sentencing grew closer. The prosecutor asked the court to find them both guilty. He wanted Artyom to be sentenced to life imprisonment in a strict correctional colony. He wanted Nikita to similarly go to such a colony, but for 25 years. The prosecutor did actually relent in one area, and that was Artyom's charges of engaging in crimes with a minor, given that the 2 were only a half a year apart in age. Their lawyers came to speak, with Artyom's asking that he actually be acquitted from the crime entirely, even though he had pled guilty to 2 of the murders. He argued that he was only recording the video that was leaked, and the audio recording couldn't conclusively prove that he was killing anyone himself. Nikita's lawyer chimed in as well, wanting to reduce his client's sentence to 20 years. On March 12th, both boys were supposed to give their final statements, but it didn't happen. They said that they weren't ready, leading to another delay. Eventually, it took place about a week later. Artyom came to read from a prepared statement. He continued to lie to the public and blame the media, writing, "Thanks to the media, on me now is a stain which I can't wash off. My grandfather was a veteran of the Great Patriotic War, and they call me a fascist, the one from whom he defended us. The materials of the case didn't prove my fault. I pled guilty only in the murder of Olga Pirog, as well as in the abuse of the corpse, but only in the fact that I shot the video. In all other crimes, I did not participate. It may sound silly, but I myself do not understand why I did it. I do not know what came over me. Sincerely, condolences. I believe that there are no people of our age who could not be corrected. You can fix any person at any age. There would be a desire. I have this desire." On April 2nd, 2013, the court sentenced Artyom to life in prison in that special colony. Nikita was sentenced to 24 years in prison with time served for 2, 3 to take place in a prison, and the rest of the years to take place at the colony. Basically, the gulag. The 2 boys once again reacted very differently. Nikita seemed nervous but kept his head up and tried not to make a fuss. The same couldn't be said for Artyom, who fell over on his bench and began sobbing. He shouted out to the victims' families, "Well, are you satisfied?" Daniil's mother, from the gallery, shouted, "You were satisfied when you killed my son, a 12-year-old child lying on the ground." Many of the victims' families were upset that Nikita wasn't also getting life in prison, resulting in a lot of criticism against the court. One of the victims, Svetlana Semyonova, filed an appeal and even wrote a letter to Vladimir Putin herself, asking for something to be done. Oddly, Nina Kuzmina, another victim who was attacked directly by Nikita, felt that the sentence was fair. The 2 maniacs were thrown back into detention. Their lawyers decided to file appeals. Artyom's appeal resulted in no change to his sentence at all. Nikita, due to being a minor at the time of the murders, had a much more successful appeal. His sentence was reduced from 24 years down to 20. With that, everything was decided. Nikita was eventually sent to a correctional facility in the same region in which the attacks were carried out. Later, he was transferred to the Sakha Republic not too long after. Artyom was transferred to the Ogneny Ostrov in the Vologda Oblast, becoming the youngest inmate there. He was interviewed by journalists about a year after he received his sentence. He still claimed that he wasn't guilty, again blaming the media for slandering him. He told them, "Your colleagues helped get me here. I see you need something from me all the time." He refused to talk anymore unless he was paid. Later, he admitted that he was writing a book, but he refused to explain what it was about. One can only imagine that it's a long-winded memoir about his innocence. In 2015, Nikita himself was moved into his penal colony. There, some on-site psychiatrists diagnosed him with what has only been called a severe mental disorder. It was ruled that, instead of the colony, he would be placed into a mental hospital involuntarily instead. But before that could happen, Nikita ended up picking up a metal dustpan and beating another inmate with it in the bathroom. He only failed in killing that inmate after some other inmates intervened and stopped him. Nikita later claimed that this attack was an attempt to get a life sentence and be transferred to Artyom's penal colony to hang out with him once again. Things were fairly quiet over the next couple of years. In 2017, Artyom claimed to the news media that he was studying law. Nikita, on the other hand, was still facing the consequences from his attack in the prison. The decision to send him to a mental hospital was overturned, and he was instead found to be criminally responsible after a second opinion. He was convicted of attempted murder, adding a whole 11 years to his stint in prison. Nikita was transferred to another colony in Angarsk in 2018. This would be where he would finally meet his end. He died by his own hand on November 28, 2021. He had created deep gashes in his arms. He did survive at first, but the medical staff weren't able to revive him. He died from his wounds 2 days later. Artyom is still in prison and will be for the rest of his life. He has done a few interviews from his penal colony where he still claims that he is no maniac, only Nikita was. He deflects all blame when asked about the victims. When asked about the death of his friend, he tends to show a bit of emotion for just a moment before going right back into using his hardened prison face. After everything came to a close, someone hacked Artyom and Nikita's old YouTube channel. At first, they started deleting videos and messing with the channel in ways that a hacker might predictably do. However, after a while, they began re-uploading the videos, including those that Nikita had deleted. The hacker said that he wanted to get into Nikita's mind and try to understand how he was thinking. Eventually, though, the channel came to be made a mess of again before being deleted entirely. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like as it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. These days I have opened a merch store. There you can get yourself some merchandise. If you want to check it out, there is a Discord, link to that in the description below. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything ever happens to the channel, or if you just need to get a hold of me, that's the easiest way to do it. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get most of the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.